young and the restless spoilers shock in the hushed corridors of an old city mansion where the walls held memories of long-forgotten scandals and whispered betrayals. A meeting was about to unfold that would shatter the fragile peace of a seemingly reconciled family. Damian, a man whose eyes had witnessed both the beauty and brutality of a past steeped in secrets, arrived unannounced at Nate and Amy's residence. Many believed his visit signified a path toward reconciliation, a promise that the strained bond between Amy and her son might finally mend. But beneath the surface of that hopeful facade lay a truth that Damian carried with a heavy heart and an even heavier purpose. Damian's reputation was one of unyielding honesty and relentless scrutiny of the past. He had never been one to sugarcoat the betrayals he had suffered, nor had he ever shown leniency toward those who had abandoned him, regardless of whether they had long since passed away. His own family, once a source of warmth and belonging, had been marred by a web of deceit that left him with scars too deep to heal. Yet, despite his misgivings and the bitter residue of his past, Damian could not fully forsake the concept of family. It was this internal conflict that drove him to seek out Nate and Amy, not to console but to reveal the truths that had long been buried beneath layers of half-truths and misleading assurances. As he stepped into the drawing room, the atmosphere seemed to thicken with tension. Nate, a man whose eyes betrayed both the tenderness of a lover and the strength of a protector, greeted him with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Amy, ever the gentle mediator striving to maintain familial unity, offered a tentative smile, hoping that this unexpected encounter might herald the dawn of better days. But Damian's demeanor was anything but conciliatory. His expression was grave, his posture rigid with the weight of the secrets he carried, a burden that he could no longer keep hidden. With a measured tone that brooked no dissent, Damian began to recount the dark chapters of his own history, a past interwoven with scandal and heartbreak. He spoke of Audra, a name that resonated with both seduction and treachery. In his youth, Damian had lived in the same bustling city as Audra, a time when innocence mingled with ambition and the lines between right and wrong were often blurred. Back then, Audra had been a radiant enigma, her charm drawing admirers from every corner of the city. But as the years passed, her true nature had emerged, a nature marked by betrayal, secrets, and clandestine rendezvous. Nate listened intently, his brow furrowing with every word. For Nate had been deeply in love with Audra, a romance that many in their circle had deemed a match made in heaven. Yet Damian's revelations painted a starkly different picture. "Nate," he said, his voice low and resonant with the gravity of his memories. "What you see as a beautiful union is nothing more than an illusion. Audra's past is a labyrinth of deceit. I have witnessed it firsthand. She was never the woman you believe her to be." Damian's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. He explained that Audra had been entangled in a secret relationship with Holdem, a man whose intentions were as murky as the deals they conducted behind closed doors. The clandestine meetings between Audra and Holdem were not merely the trysts of forbidden lovers but were laced with plans of escape, schemes to vanish from a world that could never accept the true nature of their alliance. These meetings, conducted in the dead of night and hidden in the shadows of the city, were carefully orchestrated maneuvers that hinted at a broader, more insidious plot. For decades, Audra's scandalous past had been an open secret among those who dared to look beyond the veneer of her cultivated persona. Damian, who had once shared the same narrow city streets with her, had seen the unmistakable signs of her duplicity. "I know you love her, Nate," Damian continued, his tone softening for a brief moment as he acknowledged the deep feelings that bound Nate to Audra, "but love should not blind you to the truth. You deserve to know the whole story, the betrayals, the escapes, and the conspiracies that have haunted her every step." Nate's mind raced with conflicted emotions. The love he had nurtured for Audra clashed violently with the images of deceit that now surfaced from Damian's revelations. Could it be that the woman he cherished was capable of such treachery? The seeds of doubt took root, and as Damian laid bare every sordid detail of Audra's past, the secret meetings, the whispered plans of elopement with Holdem, and the dark, irrevocable choices she had made, Nate felt his heart tighten in a vice of uncertainty. Each revelation was like a shard of glass piercing through the tender fabric of his idealized memories. Amy, standing by Nate's side, watched silently as the man she had come to trust for his unwavering sense of duty and truth became visibly disturbed. She had hoped that Damian's visit would serve as a bridge to reconciliation, a way to heal old wounds and restore familial bonds. Instead, she found herself witnessing the slow unraveling of a love story that had once seemed unassailable. In that charged moment, the possibility of a future unburdened by secrets seemed to slip further away. Damian, sensing the turmoil in the room, pressed on. "I have no desire to become entangled in your lives further than necessary," he confessed, his eyes meeting Nate's with an intensity that demanded acknowledgement. "But you have the right to know, if you are to continue loving Audra, you must accept all that she is, even if it means embracing a past that is as dark and unforgiving as the night itself." His words, though delivered with a cold finality, carried the weight of someone who had long since abandoned the hope of reconciliation with his own painful history. For Nate, the conversation had transformed from a potential path to healing into an existential crisis. The possibility of embracing Audra's tainted past gnawed at his sense of self and his ideals of trust and fidelity. How could he reconcile the image of the woman he loved with the grim reality that Damian described? It was as if the very foundation of his life was being rocked by a revelation that threatened to upend everything he had built. His identity, his future, and the sanctity of the promises he had made to those he loved. The room fell into a heavy silence as Nate grappled with the enormity of Damian's disclosures. Outside, the night stretched on, indifferent to the personal tragedy unfolding within those walls. The echoes of a turbulent past reverberated against the present, blurring the line between forgiveness and accountability. In that somber moment, the bonds of family, love, and loyalty were put to the ultimate test. Damian's visit had not been an act of reconciliation as many had assumed. It was a reckoning, a brutal reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of resurfacing when least expected. And now, Nate stood at a crossroads, burdened with the responsibility of choosing between an unblemished ideal and the raw, unvarnished truth. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting long shadows that danced with memories of bygone days, Nate's mind remained in turmoil. He knew that the decisions he made in the coming hours would shape not only his own destiny but also the future of his relationship with Audra. A future now fraught with uncertainty, mistrust, and the inescapable weight of secrets. In the end, the meeting of Damian, Nate, and Amy was less a gesture of familial unity and more a stark confrontation with the realities of a past that refused to stay hidden. The bitter truths had been revealed, and with them came the realization that no amount of love or loyalty could erase the scars left by years of deception. Nate's heart, now burdened by the knowledge of Audra's true nature, trembled under the strain of a decision that might forever alter the course of his life. And as the day broke over a city that had seen too many secrets and too few absolutions, the question lingered in the air like a fading echo: could Nate ever forgive the past and, in doing so, secure a future untainted by the ghosts of betrayal? Thus, with Damian's revelations echoing in the quiet aftermath, the delicate balance of trust and treachery was irrevocably disturbed, leaving Nate to navigate a labyrinth of emotions where every step forward threatened to reveal yet another dark secret from a past that could never truly be left behind. Nate's world had been shattered. What was supposed to be a visit to discuss family and the possibility of mending old wounds had instead turned into a cataclysmic revelation. Damian's words rang in his ears, each sentence a hammer blow to the carefully constructed reality Nate had built with Audra. The woman he had loved, trusted, and believed to be pure had been living a life so entangled in lies that it threatened to undo everything he held dear. Damian had revealed that Audra and Holdem weren't just past lovers or fleeting acquaintances, they had been married. For years, they had shared a life, intertwined in a toxic relationship that had ended with a divorce so shrouded in mystery that no one knew the real reasons behind their separation. But the most damning part of Damian's revelation wasn't just the marriage, it was the fact that Audra had been concealing this truth from Nate all along. She had woven an entirely different narrative, one of innocence and victimhood, painting herself as a tragic soul who had only ever known hardship. She had convinced Nate that her past was filled with the kind of stories that begged for sympathy and understanding. But the truth, as Damian revealed, was far darker. Audra, a woman who had crafted a facade of sweetness and vulnerability, was far from the innocent figure she had portrayed. The years she had spent with Holdem were not those of a wronged woman, but of a woman who had been complicit in secrets, lies, and manipulations. Their relationship had been toxic, marked by power struggles and hidden motives, and their eventual divorce had been swept under the rug. Audra had never mentioned it, not to Nate, not to anyone, because she knew the truth would expose her for the person she truly was. A far cry from the saintly image she had projected. Damian's words sliced through Nate like a blade. He had always suspected something was off, always felt that Audra's story didn't add up. The constant contradictions, the excuses, the evasions whenever Holdem's name came up, it all suddenly made sense. Nate had been living in a lie, and now the bitter truth had forced its way to the surface. Audra wasn't the woman he thought she was. She wasn't the woman he had fallen in love with. And as much as it pained him to admit it, she had been lying to him for months, maybe even years. The evidence that Damian had provided, physical proof of Audra's past with Holdem, left Nate reeling. His hands trembled as he held the photos, the documents, the undeniable proof of the twisted history that Audra had tried so hard to bury. Each piece of evidence was a jagged shard, and they dug deeper with every passing second. The woman he had given his trust to had systematically destroyed any hope for their future with her web of deceit. And now, standing in the aftermath, Nate felt his anger surge uncontrollably. "You lied to me, Audra," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible as the weight of the betrayal crushed him. "You told me we had a future. You told me you loved me." But the anger that coursed through him wasn't just about the lies. It wasn't just about Audra's betrayal. It was about everything they had built together. Their love, their plans, their promises. It had all been built on a foundation of lies. And now it was crumbling around him. Damian's departure didn't offer Nate any relief. Instead, it only left behind a bitter aftertaste of unfinished business. Damian had warned Nate, had made sure the truth was revealed in all its ugly detail. But Damian had also made it clear that there would be no reconciliation. There would be no forgiveness. His words to Amy echoed in Nate's mind long after Damian had left. "I will never forgive you for your past," Damian had said, his voice cold and unyielding. "The damage has been done, and there is no going back." It was as though Damian had spoken not just to Amy, but to the entire room. The weight of his condemnation hung heavily in the air, a reminder that the past could not be undone, no matter how much one might wish for a clean slate. Amy had tried to mediate, to smooth over the tension, but Damian's words were too final, too absolute. There was no room for forgiveness in his view of the world, and Nate could feel the truth of it gnawing at him. Amy stood in silence, watching as Damian walked out, leaving the room in a cloud of tension and unresolved conflict. She had tried to play the peacekeeper, to find a way to mend the fractures in their family. But now, she found herself caught in the middle of a storm she had never anticipated. The revelations about Audra were enough to bring anyone to their knees, and Amy understood that Nate was a man who had been irrevocably changed by what he had learned. There would be no going back to the way things were. Nate's anger boiled over as he paced the room, his mind racing through 100 different scenarios. What was he supposed to do now? How could he face Audra? How could he ever trust her again after everything she had hidden from him? The life they had built seemed like a lie now, and he couldn't escape the feeling that the very ground beneath him had been pulled out from under him. His thoughts were a blur of fury and confusion. What was he supposed to do with all this information? Did he confront Audra? Did he walk away from the relationship that had consumed him for so long? Could he ever truly forgive her? As the night stretched on, Nate wrestled with these questions, each answer more elusive than the last. He felt as though he was standing on the precipice of something monumental that could change the course of his life, and he wasn't sure whether he was ready to take the step that would lead him to the other side. But one thing was certain. Damian's revelations had irrevocably altered the course of everything. Nate would never look at Audra the same way again. Their relationship, which had once seemed so pure, was now stained by the poison of deceit. And Nate had to decide whether he could live with the truth, or whether it would destroy everything he had ever known. Damian, for his part, had left nothing behind but a trail of destruction. He had made his point, delivered his verdict, and walked away without a single look back. For him, there was no room for mercy, no room for second chances. The past, in his eyes, was a sentence that could never be undone. And as Damian disappeared into the night, leaving nothing but his harsh judgment behind, Nate found himself standing at the crossroads of his future, unsure of where to go next or how to fix the damage that had already been done. In the days that followed, Nate's emotions remained in turmoil. He couldn't escape the truth, but he also couldn't escape the lingering questions about what came next. Could he rebuild his life, even if it meant walking away from Audra? Could he move past the lies and create a future without the shadows of betrayal hanging over him? Or had the damage been so deep that no amount of healing would ever make him whole again? As for Amy, she found herself at a loss. She had tried to mediate, to heal the wounds, but now she was left watching as the pieces of her family shattered before her eyes. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that the rift between Nate and Audra might be impossible to repair. But the truth had been revealed, and with it came a bitter certainty. No one in the family would be the same again. In the end, Damian's visit had done more than uncover the truth. It had exposed the raw, unhealed wounds of a family that had been living in the shadow of secrets for far too long. The damage was done, and now all that remained was to figure out how to pick up the pieces of a life that had been irrevocably changed. Audra had never been one to fear confrontation, not in the way others did. For years, she had danced in the shadows, manipulating the narrative, weaving her story to fit whatever suit she found herself in. But today, as she listened to Damian's revelations from behind the door, everything she had worked for seemed to come crashing down around her. Her past, the tangled web of lies and deceit she had spun, was now laid bare before Nate, and she knew there was no coming back from this. She pressed herself flat against the cold, hard door, her heart pounding in her chest as she listened to every word Damian said. Each sentence cut through her like a sharp blade, and as the truth of her relationship with Holdem and the life she had tried to bury resurfaced, Audra realized that her carefully constructed image was nothing but a facade. She had convinced Nate that she was a woman of innocence, a victim of circumstances, someone deserving of love and protection. But now, there was no hiding from the truth. Nate knew, Amy knew, and worst of all, Damian knew. The room felt as if it were closing in on her. She had no choice but to run. She could feel the walls pressing tighter with every passing second. She had been caught, exposed, and now the only escape she saw was through the back door, into the night, into anonymity. But even as the urge to flee gripped her, there was one thing Audra couldn't quite shake: her belief that Nate still loved her. She had convinced herself that their bond was unbreakable, that no matter the truth, Nate would never harm her. The affection they had shared, the tenderness, the promises, they all seemed too real for her to believe that he would turn on her now. In her mind, Nate was different from the rest. He had to forgive her. He had to love her despite the sins she had buried deep. Yet, as the seconds stretched into eternity, the cold grip of reality began to settle in. She had seen the look in Nate's eyes as he processed the information Damian had delivered. The flicker of doubt, the confusion. It was there, plain as day. He had been shattered. The trust between them was already cracking, and Audra knew that once that trust was broken, it might never be restored. But still, she clung to the hope that Nate's love for her would transcend everything. Unfortunately, there was one person in this house who would never let Audra off the hook: Amy. Amy had always been the moral compass of their family, the one who believed in justice and righteousness above all else. She was not a woman who would simply forgive and forget, especially when it came to deception as vile as Audra's. As Audra stood there, paralyzed by the weight of what she had just overheard, she could already feel Amy's gaze on her, even though the older woman had yet to speak. Amy was a force to be reckoned with, and Audra knew that whatever mercy Nate might have shown, Amy would not. Amy's voice broke the silence, her words calm but edged with the certainty of someone who had made up their mind. "You thought you could keep up this charade, didn't you, Audra?" Her tone held no room for argument, no space for apology. "You thought you could deceive my son, manipulate him into believing your lies." Amy took a slow step forward, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the woman who had once been the object of her family's affection, but had now become the target of her wrath. Audra felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She had always known that Amy would eventually find out the truth, but she had hoped it would be after she had spun another story, another reason to justify her actions. But here she was, exposed, with nowhere left to run. "Amy, please," Audra stammered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was just trying to protect myself, to start fresh. I never meant for it to go this far." Amy's laugh was dry, bitter. "Protect yourself? You've been playing with Nate's heart. manipulating his trust for months. You've lied to him, twisted the truth, and now you expect me to believe that you're the victim in all this. Audra's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the walls closing in. She could hear the distant rumble of Nate's footsteps as he moved toward the living room, his face unreadable. He was coming to confront her, and all Audra could do was stand there, trying to mask the panic rising in her chest. Before Nate could reach them, Amy continued. I won't let you hurt him any longer, Audra. I won't stand by and watch you tear my family apart. Not when I know exactly who you are. Nate entered the room, his expression a mixture of anger, disappointment, and confusion. He saw Audra standing there, looking vulnerable but also guilty. Too guilty for him to ignore. He had loved her. He had trusted her. But now, with all the evidence in front of him, he couldn't deny the truth. Is this what you've been hiding from me? Nate asked, his voice low and heavy with the weight of the revelation. This is who you really are, isn't it? A liar, a manipulator. You've been lying to me the whole time, Audra. Audra's eyes flickered with something between fear and desperation. Nate, I never wanted this to happen. I love you. I do. But Nate couldn't hear her anymore. The words felt hollow, empty. He had given her everything, and she had taken it all without a second thought. The truth of her past, the things she had hidden. Everything had come to light, and there was no way to undo the damage. You don't get to keep using me, Audra, Nate said, his voice shaking with emotion. I gave you everything, and you betrayed me. Audra's heart sank. She had never thought it would come to this. She had always believed that love could overcome the darkness of her past. But now, as Nate's words echoed in her mind, she realized how naive she had been. Love couldn't fix everything, and Nate, for all his affection, could never erase the truth. Amy turned to Nate, her eyes full of determination. He needs to see the truth, Nate. All of it. You deserve to know what kind of person she really is. Devon's warning echoed in Nate's mind, the one he had dismissed as mere concern. I told you, Nate. Audra's past is messy. She's got too many secrets for you to even know where to start. Now, Nate was left to face the consequences of his trust. The heartbreak was palpable, the weight of his disillusionment nearly unbearable. He had been warned, but he had chosen to ignore the signs. He had let his love for Audra blind him to the truth. And now, as he looked at her, standing there in the ruins of their relationship, he couldn't help but wonder how much pain he was truly capable of bearing. Audra, for her part, knew the game was over. She had lost. She had gambled everything on Nate's love, and now it had crumbled before her eyes. No amount of pleading, no amount of apologies could undo the damage she had caused. The facade was gone. The mask was off. And now she would face the consequences of her actions. As Amy stood firmly beside Nate, resolute in her protection of her family, Audra realized that the road ahead was no longer one she could walk. The consequences of her lies had caught up with her, and she could no longer escape the judgment that awaited her. Nate's heart ached as he watched her. For the first time, he wondered if he had ever truly known her at all.